Oh, man. Never a dull moment in Mississippi high school football, well, slash Florida, recruiting, but ties to the state of Mississippi. Out of bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. Only this group can get worked up in late June when most people are focused on the pool, the beach, the lake, the river. We did a lot of lake this weekend and floated around, took it very, very easy. Had an amazing dinner with a couple friends of ours and on Friday night. Just a really, really good weekend. But recruiting will get everybody wound up, that's for sure. And this class has everybody wound up, so that's good. It's good for 247 Sports. We know that. GenesPage.com. We are the Out of Bounds Show. Steve Robertson joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance Guest Line. Bundle your car and home. Save with your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent. And the Boneyard Podcast, Steve Robertson on the show. All right, Steve. Former MRA, now IMG, Timothy Lewis commits to Mississippi State over the weekend. And it kind of caused a stir on the boards and on the Twitters. Did you expect that?
Did I expect the stir or did I expect the commitment? I absolutely didn't expect the commitment. I did expect the stir as soon as it happened. And it's one of those things, man, with recruiting. Just when you think you got everything figured out, man, something changes. And, Jimothy was here a couple weekends ago for camp and saw him there. And I'm like, is that Jimothy Lewis? What's he doing here? Because he really hadn't been on the radar. But give Will Friend a lot of credit. Will was recruiting him at Auburn, continued to recruit him here at Mississippi State, got State back in the ball game, and ultimately gets him to commit.
Okay, so he was at MRA. He's now been at IMG. Got a bunch of offers. Why was it such an ordeal out on the boards and on Twitter?
Well, I think, it's one of those things we talk about, you just when you think you got it figured out, things change. And I think a lot of people thought that Ole Miss was really trending for him. And again, a lot of people referencing David Johnson's report, and I want to defend David a little bit here. You're only as good as your sources. And if your source doesn't have a good read on things, then ultimately you don't have a good read on things. And that's just kind of how life works sometimes. But, David put out that he was hearing the most from Ole Miss, South Florida, and State. So people kind of misconstrue that sometimes, and they run with that. But I think a lot of people thought, well, if he stays in State or returns to the State, Ole Miss is probably the favorite. And then ultimately it ends up being Mississippi State. So there's this feeling of cognitive dissonance for people when you think things are going to go one way and they go another. And as my wife says all the time, that college football recruiting coverage is just a soap opera for men. And so here we are with the plot twist. Dun, dun, dun.
Well, all right. So it's a long time till signing day, but can you remember a run? I mean, Arnett and his staff are on a roll with what has happened this past week. Although they did well, they had been doing well. I mean, they got their quarterback early that people really like. And they also got a couple other pieces early, and then they went through a little, downtime, and now they've been on a run. This is one of the better runs since you mentioned last week. What year did you reference? Like 2013 or 14?
15.
15.
That was
15.
Yeah, when you got Mark McLaurin, Jamal Peters, Leo Lewis decommits from Alabama, it was just a lot of things that happened. And you're like, hey, they got some juice. But that was more about quantity than it was quality. I mean, you had 10 commitments in a night, but, some of those guys that at the time we knew were just kind of marginal takes. But Keith Mixon was a guy we were really excited about back then. But this is a much different deal. These are higher-ranked players with more options. It's not just, a situation where it's a solid run where you're taking guys to get your name in the paper. I mean, these are guys that you expect to have, really good college careers. And that's the big part of all this. It's like, it's not just the fact that you're getting some kids to commit. You're getting kids, a lot of schools wanting to commit, which says a lot about Arnett and the staff. And you mentioned the little lull they had in the late spring. And, I'm not a guy that ever gets, up in arms about recruiting. Because I know that it's a long process, and you're going to get 25 or so every single year, and they're going to be good players, and then you got to develop them. But I'll be honest with you, I'm starting to think, they need to pick it up a little bit. People are like, Steve, are you ready to panic? I said, I'm not ready to panic, but I am getting a little bit concerned. And everybody's like, hey, just wait till camp. Just wait till camp. Just wait till camp. Well, sure enough, they get to camp, and it's been like a house on fire ever since.
Where do you think Jimothy Lewis would be ranked in the state of Mississippi?
I think he'd probably be the top player in the state, to be quite honest with you. And I know that I'm in the minority here, and that's okay, because I'll eventually write an article to show that I was right about some other stuff a couple classes ago that everybody just said, well, it's going to be amazing. It wasn't amazing. More busts in that class than anything in the history of my career. This year, our defense, we have a lot of really good defensive linemen in the state this year. I do not agree with the order in which they're ranked. I'm not a big proponent of guys that are tweeners. If I have to talk myself into a guy, he's not the best player in the state. When you've got a guy that, he's got linebacker build, but he's got defensive tackle speed, that guy can't be the number one player in the state. If people are like, oh, he's got all these offers. Well, supposedly, right? And that's what happens, too. When you start counting offers, you get yourself into trouble. What does the tape show? They're like, oh, you mean to tell me that Nick Saban offered this kid and you know better than Nick Saban? I was like, no. But I know that Nick Saban's staff will sometimes extend an offer. It's a glorified invitation to camp. And then later on, other schools like, hey, we beat Alabama. No, you didn't. You didn't beat Alabama. But it looks good it looks good in the article, but that's just not the reality of it. And so I think Jimothy Lewis is a guy, number one, has a true position, has the measurables and the tape to demonstrate he can play that position at a high level within the Southeastern Conference. And so, there's a lot of great players in the state this year, but a lot of those guys are a little bit, kind of scratch and dent. You kind of got to say, well, I really like him and he projects well, but he won't play the run. Well, in this conference, if you don't play the run, you're going to be in the portal in about 2 years.
Steve Robertson, the Boneyard Podcast, genespage.com. Recruiting got everybody hot and bothered over the weekend. I'll take more of this. It's going to be ebb and flow between Mississippi State and Ole Miss, among others. There's a lot of other programs and coaches hunting around this state from now through December. Steve, the coaches around the country, the official vacation kicked in Friday and goes for a while now, right?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and this is one of those things in the beginning, people were kind of, hey, what's going to happen with this new calendar and a new recruiting calendar? Because typically, you had the summer months and the dead period was a little bit shorter. Well, now, you can still talk to kids, you still interact. You just don't host them on campus. But when everybody gets back, we're going to be getting ready for fall football camp, and so are the players too. I mean, guys need a break from this stuff too. I mean, from the time that they get from junior day all the way to all these prospect camps and things like that, it is a big commitment for the high school coaches, for the players themselves, the parents, the families. Everybody needs a bit of a break right now. So everybody will kind of take a little bit of a deep breath here. But I don't know that Arnett and those guys are going to do that. They'll go on vacation. They'll just be, doing it from, Orange Beach or something. But, I don't think things are going to slow down for a bit until you get into game mode. And you mentioned this earlier, and we talked about this multiple times on your show. We knew this year was going to be like this. We knew that it was going to be, especially between State and Ole Miss, because the in-state talent pool is so deep. Some of your favorite players are going to go to the other school. Fans need to be aware of that. And it's a great time to be a subscriber. But anybody that thinks, okay, well, State's just going to leave Ole Miss in the dust here, you're kidding yourself. Ole Miss will react. Ole Miss will punch back. They'll counter here. And they may even go try to take a Mississippi State commitment, or they'll go take a state lean, because coaches, despite what they say at a press conference, they are cognizant of what happens and what the perception is within their fan base. And so anybody that thinks, oh, well, this is just, it's just going to be one of those deals where State just runs off and leaves them, you're kidding yourself. It's going to be a lot of ebb and flow and a lot of back and forth, a lot of gamesmanship all the way up to National Signing Day, and we're here to cover it. Can't wait to do it.
Yeah, well, I mean, your site, among the other sites for Ole Miss, have been crazy the last couple weeks. And it's not a downtime by any stretch, but it's always good to have people all over the site in June. So what you would reshuffle the 247 Sports top 5, top 10, right?
I would probably reshuffle the whole top 25. I mean, I think there's some guys on the back end of this class that kind of got a default ranking, and we'll get them evaluated. I mean, it's not like one of these deals where it's all set in stone. But a guy like Fred Clark is too low. That's without a doubt, he's too low. There's some other kids I think are too high. But that's the thing. The first rankings are the worst rankings, right? A lot of people don't fully appreciate that because you have less information. You're ranking guys in the beginning, based on maybe your evaluations from last year. And all of a sudden the kid shows up on Twitter and he's claiming, 7, 8 offers. Well, those guys get evaluated first, right? I mean, because you're like, well, wait a minute. We didn't know much about this kid.
Right.
But then you get the camps and you get this combines and you get spring evaluation period. All of a sudden starting to get more information. And because like in the beginning, every kid that you talk to that plays a skill position is 6'2", 190 and runs a 4.4 40. That's what everybody says. But all of a sudden you see him in camp and he's really 5'11", and he's about 175 pounds and he runs 4.7. Okay, well, he's probably a G5 kid. But in the beginning, everybody's a prospect. You get this huge funnel, and it's like the longer you go in the process, the more narrow the funnel gets, and you figure out who the true SEC players are. So there will be a shakeup in the in-state rankings here over the course of the next, several weeks. But again, it's an inexact science. One of the most difficult things to do is to project future human performance. But I think we do a good job of it. I'm pleased with our evaluators. But when I feel like I've got a kid that's being slighted, I go to bat for him. I do, and I'll say, here's why he's good, and here's why this kid probably needs to come down a little bit. And there's a conversation that happens. And it's not to say, hey, well, this kid committed to this school, so we need to bump him up. You got to defend your case. I mean, we got some guys that have worked in the National Football League now on the evaluation side, so that's a big part of things.
Give me a player, 2, 3 outside of the top 10, regardless of where they're going or who maybe they're committed to, that you believe the regional or national guys at 247 Sports have ranked poorly. Why don't they lean on you and David to do the 90% of the heavy lifting? I don't know if anybody gets out more than you do, but why would they not do that, or do they? How does that work, Steve?
Well, I don't go out as much as I used to be quite fair, and that's kind of by design. I just one of the things that I'd always wanted to do when I got ready to take over is I thought we needed more of a dedicated baseball writer because Mississippi State's such a baseball school, and so rather than go out and hire somebody, I'm doing a lot more of that than I used to. I'd be on the road all the time. My wife was a football widow, and I'd like to stay married, just so you know.
Sure.
But there's a handful of guys out here, and I'm pulling up the rankings right now just because I like Damian Miller at Port Gibson a lot, and we're able to get him a decent ranking, but I think he's a guy that you watch, and with his senior film, maybe a guy that could move up. I think we have him as an 87 right now. He's currently committed to Southern Miss. Just recently picked up an offer from Tulane. But this is one of those guys that is just kind of tucked away in an under-recruited area within our state. And I can tell you some funny stories about that, too. I remember Dan Mullen would be like, hey, don't do anything with this kid. Keep him a 3-star. Keep him a 3-star. We won't shine a light on it, Yeah, Dan, you got to get out and recruit, buddy, But, guys like him, in the past, like Dan Mullen would have had him committed in March and then not done anything, just don't do anything with him,
Benardrick McKinney and Jonathan Banks type guys, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. People forget this too. This is one thing that kind of drove me wild about the last staff. Some guys in the recruiting aspect of things that kind of were too reliant on other schools. Well, we're going to wait till he has a Power 5 offer from somebody else. Well, that's not going to work in Mississippi, because just for the guys you mentioned, State beat Holmes Community College for Benardrick McKinney. They beat Holmes Community College for Jonathan Banks. As Holmes gets a lot of pub on our show today. But, if you're relying on other schools to do your evaluation, you don't have any business in this conference.
Could not agree more. But, yeah. All right. So there is between 10 and 35. Let's say guys ranked outside the top 11 and 35. And I had an SEC coach from assistant from outside the state that said he didn't understand why some of these guys weren't ranked higher, Steve. So I mean, you could go as far as 8 to 10 guys aren't ranked high enough from 11 to 35, and there could be a little juice like Benardrick McKinney, Jonathan Banks. Snoop Connor was way too low. What, 32nd, 33rd? Good hell. So it's not just one or two. There could be a lot of guys ranked too low outside the top 10, right?
Yeah, Alex Foster at St. Joseph, he things between him and State are kind of cooled a little bit, but I still love this kid's game. And, and he's ranked 33 in the composite. He's a top 25 player. I really like him. Now, maybe he ends up at Arkansas or somewhere else, but I don't think you should stop evaluating and promoting kids because they're not going to your school. I think we've got an obligation as people in the state of Mississippi to provide our young people the proper coverage that they deserve. And I think Foster's one of those kids. It was kind of a little bit of a late bloomer, kind of late to the recruiting radar. I like his game a lot. Saw him in camp. I wanted to like him even more, but that doesn't mean he's not an SEC guy. It just means maybe he's not a priority target right now. Trey Petty is at 32. The quarterback, state championship quarterback from Starkville. Saw him in camp at the 7-on-7. He was absolutely electric. Of course, there's no pass rush there, but as far as him making the throws, mechanically, he was where he needed to be. And the fact that he is 32nd, I think is probably a little bit criminal. Chris Davis out of Picayune recently committed to Stanford. Like him a lot too. Now I'm a little bit reluctant to jump aboard the Picayune running back trains. I've been burned with this so many times because so many of them are a product of the system because they do such a great job down there.
God, they just ground and pound on people. Good Lord.
And then they get a lead on you, and they get in that unbalanced line and just run you off the field, And so you got to look at that. So the numbers are kind of, they are a product of the system. But I don't think you can unfairly, evaluate players and say, well, because he is a product of the system. It's kind of like the whole Will Rogers thing with the air raid. I mean, Will's a good quarterback. It doesn't matter what offense he's running. I think Chris Davis is a guy that's not just a product of the Picayune system. I think he is a bona fide player. So he's the guy that I think maybe moved a little bit in the end. But, probably the guy that maybe two guys really that kind of jump out to me that they're in the top 25, but I think they're a little bit underrated is William Eccles from Houston, Mississippi, offensive tackle prospect, probably be an interior guy, play a guard on the next level, just kind of depending on what system he picks. And then San Frisco McGee, the thing with McGee is, what is he, right? I mean, it's like you look at him and you say he's a very gifted and talented athlete, but where does he project on the next level? And sometimes that gives you a little bit pause. My philosophy's always been, the guys that are ranked in the top 5 have to have a projectable position. And what they're playing today or what you expect them to play later is already defined. They can't just be an athlete and say, well, he could be an OLDL. Well, okay, well, if that's the case, what's he better at? I think you've got to know exactly how these guys project and what positions they project for. And that isn't always the case. Again, I can't get behind the tweener being a top 5 player. Because that's just another variable I think that kind of limits their productivity on the next level. If a guy doesn't have a truly defined position, it's difficult for me to get behind him being ranked exceptionally high.
I agree with that 100%. Steve Robertson on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line, and we don't like to agree. So according to your board and Twitter, so there you go. I just said it. We're going to cut that out. San Frisco McGee, where do you project him? Like outside linebacker?
That's a great question. And I say watching him in person,
2 years from now?
That was the big thing for me. Like when I watch his film, of course, I'm from Columbia, Mississippi. So I've got people down there in South Mississippi like, hey, you need to take a look at this kid. I was like, I'm just curious how big he is. You couldn't really tell on film because a lot of those kids pad up, right? So they look bigger on film than they are in person. He was much bigger than I expected him to be. And that's the point you look at and say, okay, well, does he outgrow the wide receiver position once he gets in the college weight room? Because you got to think about where these guys going to look like with 20 pounds. When you put 20 pounds on San Frisco McGee, he might be a Malcolm Johnson type, right? He's not a wide receiver if he puts on 20 pounds. I mean, because he's already so big and filled out. And so you begin to think about that. Well, he goes and plays tight end. Well, okay, I don't know that he has the measurables to play tight end. So what is he, I think maybe he is an outside backer. I think he is the guy because of his ability to run, and I think he's a guy that's going to be able to carry the weight without hurting his overall athleticism. I really like his game a lot. Do I think he's a top 10 player? Absolutely, I don't. But I do think that he is a guy that can be a really, really good SEC football player. And I think I would probably take him as an athlete and try him at linebacker and see how things go.
What a Steve Robertson, genespage.com, 247 Sports, talking recruiting. We had a listener that wants to know about Isaiah Autry, committed to Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Offensive lineman.
Yeah, I like him a lot. I don't think that he is undervalued, though. And he is a top 20 player, and he's committed to Oklahoma. And, one of the things, I think he's in line to have a big senior year. And I think if he's the guy that maybe spent his whole career at Itawamba AHS, I might like him a little bit better. I think last year was his first year playing at this level. And I think there was a little bit of, adjustment. And the bottom line is this: when you get into public football in the state of Mississippi, especially in the higher classifications, you better bring a sack lunch with you. I mean, guys are going to get after you. I mean, and so when you've got guys that are moving from a smaller program to a more competitive league, there is an adjustment period. I think Isaiah Autry is a guy that's going to be a good player. And, give Oklahoma some credit for getting on him early. I do think maybe he's a little bit undervalued, but he is a top 20 player, so I can live with that. But I won't be surprised to look up in 3 years and you're like, oh, holy hell, what happened here? This guy's a dominant force, at Oklahoma. But I do think he's a really good player, but I think that he's a guy that last year at times had a little bit of a adjustment period, getting to a new level. But, again, I think he's a good player. I don't think that he is a top 10 player, though.
Okay, what about Tyler Carter out of Vicksburg? Do you like where he's ranked? Higher, lower, not sure, need to see more? Where are you with Tyler Carter out of Vicksburg?
I think a little bit of both. I mean, I'm okay with him being a top 15 player, but what is it, 1 year of high school football? And so you'd like to see a bigger sample size. Now, as far as the raw materials go, I mean, you look at the raw athleticism, he's a baseball player and a football player, and, he's coming in at 6'6", 250 pounds. So there's a lot to like about him. You just don't have a lot of tape that you look at. But I think you take him on raw athleticism, and kind of hope for the best. But I do like his game a lot, but I'm interested to see what kind of senior year he has. But if I was making in my top 25, like he probably would be just outside the top 15. He's like 14 with us now. I'd probably have him 16, 17. I think it's because of the fact, it's a small sample size to evaluate from.
We got a minute or so. What about Lamonis in the transfer portal?
Yeah, they had a lot of visitors on campus. I say a lot. They had some visitors on campus this weekend, and I do think you're going to see some commitment sooner rather than later as they get closer to enrollment for the second session of summer school. What's interesting too is like nowadays, you're almost reluctant to put this stuff out there just because of the fact that you put out, hey, this kid's coming here. Well, then all of a sudden, LSU, and not that they would ever do this kind of thing, but LSU would come in with some big NIL money, from a bad company. And buy the kid out from under you. I mean, that's kind of where we are. It's like it's almost like you kind of want to protect what you got, and all of a sudden they enroll. So yeah, they're being awfully careful out there. But again, state's not going to go out and sign a ton of kids, but you got to get a catcher. What you got with Ross Highfield, but you need that guy that can give him a day off, and you got to get a third baseman, and then you got to get some arms, and then you could take a best available situation. I mean, if Braden Montgomery goes in the portal, and again, there's no guarantee that he does. If Braden Montgomery goes in the portal, Mississippi State has to be very bullish about that and do what they can to get him. Even though if you look at it and say, hey, we got some interesting outfield pieces, you don't have many as interesting as that kid.
We'll leave it there. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Steve Robertson joined us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. That interview was brought to you by Bulldog Burger in Ridgeland. Lunch today, Bulldog Burger, Starkville, and Tupelo. Amazing burgers, appetizers, sandwiches. They've got Stella Artois, Key City, Michelob Ultra, amazing beers, and a really cool bar in Ridgeland and an outside area. All at Bulldog Burger in Ridgeland. That was a quick 2 hours. We're going to have Jason Perigin on at 9:30, Pitmaster and Mississippian. And he cooked for us out in the left, put on an absolute clinic out in left field during baseball season. And you needed it considering the way Mississippi State baseball played. We'll be back in a second.